Okay, tone and style is a little bit different than how the whole symbolism and allegory worked. This one is a little more subtle and works as a different tool as far as how authors may use this when they're writing. So, understanding why they use it and how they use it, and how they use diction in controlling their words and why, and the different types of tools that they can pull out of their tool belt, so to speak, to do this, to affect tone inside of their story and to affect their different types of style, is what we're going to kind of look at this time. Again, kind of carrying forward that whole idea of staring at that open field of acreage, trying to figure out where that treasure is buried when you only get to choose one hole to dig to hit the hidden treasure. We're doing the same thing. We're still looking for that underlying meaning, that depth that's underneath the surface in the story, that's not going to be obvious to us, that's not going to be X marks the spot like there is on the old treasure maps. We don't have a map. We're out of our depth here. We don't get to look down from above and stare down at the ground and see the big X on there for us to start digging. We have to figure it out from a different way. And that's how these stories work. We can't just look at the first line and it tells us what the story is about, or it tells us what to think about the main character, or it tells us how to feel about the storyline, or exactly how to feel about the characters, or exactly what their relationship is about. We don't know. We have to dig it out. And the only way we could really do that is by understanding how the authors utilize these different types of tools that they have at their disposal. So we are kind of reverse engineering these stories, kind of looking at it from a different point of view. And another way that often we look at how to dig into stories like this, into literature, and not even just literature, but into writing altogether, including not even just writing, including conversations, including when other people are talking to you, including what you hear on the news, including what you hear when you overhear other people's conversations, including an article in the newspaper, including some resources that you may dig up for a paper or a research paper or something like that, is understanding how tone works, which is what we're kind of talking about today, because it's hard to dig out. It's easier usually for us to understand tone when we're speaking, because you can hear my tone of voice and you can understand the difference between often when I'm using sarcasm, when I sound angry, when I'm joking, and that kind of thing, or when I sound sad or upset, or when it's changing, when I'm going from sounding calm to angry to remorseful. You can sort of hear that. So you don't just have my words to go by, but you have the tone of my voice to go by. It's why we use emoticons in texting and in Facebook and in whatever kind of social media you use, or texting or whatever, because sometimes our text messages and our Facebook posts or whatever social media you use, or whatever emailing you're doing, sometimes our just flat print does just that. It falls flat. And you can't tell what kind of tone there is. So the people on the other end may take it as you're being mean, or you're being catty, or you're being a jerk, and really you really weren't. Or maybe they're like, oh, thank you, but you actually were being a jerk. You meant it in a really mean way, and they thought you were being nice. So we use emoticons to kind of help give it tone. That's why we have the little winky faces, and that's why I often, when I'm emailing you guys back and forth, I put smiley faces and the little faces where they're sticking out the tongue and the winks, because I'm trying to make sure that my emails to you don't come across as flat, or it doesn't come across as me being short with you, because sometimes I don't have a lot of time to email you and I don't want it to come off as bit off, like I'm being short with you. I don't want you to feel that way. So I will often use a smiley face to make sure you understand that I'm smiling, that I'm happy, that everything's good, we're all good. So I'm trying to present tone to you with emoticons, but guess what? Stories aren't going to have emoticons in them. Newspaper articles are not going to have emoticons attached to them. You're not going to see somebody's face. And in The Hills Like White Elephants, there's no emoticons. So you're going to have to be able to read tone from words. And how do you do that? You have to understand how words convey attitude. So we're going to talk about that. That's what this is for. So first you have to understand the difference between tone and style. You need to be able to separate that. So tone refers to methods by which writers and speakers reveal attitudes or feelings towards things, towards anything. Attitudes and feelings towards material, attitudes and feelings towards their readers, because sometimes, and I'm sure that you have all seen Facebook posts or whatever, social media posts, where clearly the person that's posting is having an attitude towards the people reading it, or attitudes towards the general situation that they're describing or analyzing. So tone lets us understand that there's some kind of emotion involved. Okay, that's what tone is. And we use this word all the time. You know, watch your tone of voice. Don't talk to me in that tone of voice. You know, don't raise your tone, right? Or lower your tone. So we're talking about something that's emotional. We're talking about something with feelings and attitude. So that's what tone is attached to. Tone is attached to attitude and feeling. Style is different. Style is just what you think it is. It's all about your style, right? It's all about the way that you assemble yourself. And that's how writers are too. Style is how writers assemble their words. It's how they put it together to make it their own. It's how we can recognize that it's their own. It's just like when you have a favorite artist that you like, whether that's like art that you look at or art that you listen to or whatever kind of art that might be. You like their style, you know, you follow them because there's something about them that attracts you to them, whether it's because of how they look or the stuff that they produce is interesting to you and attractive to you, whether it's something that you look at or listen to or whatever. It's something about their style, and it's because of how they assemble that wordplay, assemble that sound, assemble their fashion, assemble whatever, right? It's how they put it together, and it's their specific and unique way of doing that that makes their style. So after a while, we all have our favorite authors, we have our favorite singers, we have our favorite blah, 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 right? And that unique way that they do it is what makes their style. That's different than tone. So they are closely connected because after a while, we could start to feel that they have their own style comes off with their own type of tone. We understand after a while how they work together. So, how they work together, that didn't work very well. No. That didn't work together at all. Okay, sorry. Their own type of style, and both of these things, tone and style, what do they have in common? Especially, I mean, for us, especially in this particular instance, what do they have in common? They have in common diction, which is, you know, just words. They have in common words. You can't have, in literature, you can't have your own style with poetry, with songwriting, with plays, with storytelling. You can't have style without a specific organization and assembling of words. You can't have tone. You can't get across to your readers or your listeners a specific way of telling tone, of showing me your attitude, of showing me that you feel angry towards something or happy towards something without really properly using your words, right? So they both have in common the ability for the author or artist or whatever to really, really understand how to manipulate diction. So that's what we're talking about in this slide set, is the ability for the authors to distinctively be able to manipulate diction. So diction is an essential aspect of both style and tone. Authors have their own distinct way to control words, okay? Everything that's written has diction in it. All diction means is words, and that's all it really means. It's a choice and control of words. Diction is a specific control of words. The trick is there's a whole bunch of different ways and tricks that authors can use to control those words. And that's what the next several slides are, is different ways, different tricks that the authors can use to control words. So then our job becomes looking for those red flags. What type of diction, what type of word control did the author use, and why did they do it? So right here it says, the right words bear the burden of controlling the ways in which the readers respond to the material, which is true, right? It's like, obviously we're the ones reading, so the authors have to be able to control how we respond. If they want us to be angry, they have to be able to write the words in a way that create that anger in us, that control our ability to build up that feeling of agitation and anger. But what if instead we get to the end of the page and we're laughing? Okay, well that means they have failed in their tone, right? That's a tone fail right there. That is absolutely a tone fail. I'm sure that most of you at some point or another have watched a horror movie that at some point in the horror movie it is so terrible that you just sort of laugh at some point. I mean, sometimes that's done on purpose, and they'll purposely make a really bad B flick, but sadly sometimes it's not. They're trying to make a scary movie, but it's terrible. It's a terrible movie, and it comes out so bad that you find yourself laughing. And sometimes I like a really good B flick horror movie for the purpose of laughing, which sounds like a really weird thing to say. But if you're a horror movie fan, like I am, some of you probably are certainly not, but I like horror movies. I like a really good horror movie, but sometimes I like a really bad horror movie just for the laughter, which sounds weird, but you know, that must be somewhere there's a director or a writer, there's a writer crying because it wasn't supposed to be funny. That's a tone fail. That means that where the right words bear the burden of controlling the ways that the readers respond to the material, that means that the words did not control the ways that the writers responded to the material. Tone fail. That is a fail. So when we watch movies, they're lucky. You know, in a good movie, they get an extra layer. They get all these extra layers, right? They get sound and they get pictures. So, of course, I just always take any chance that I can to put Vin Diesel in my slides anyway. So there he is. But in this particular instance, it worked out because in movies, they get to show us pictures which help give an extra layer to help us understand and help us respond to materials. So we get sound, movies get music to help us respond to material, right? They'll play sad music in the background, or they're playing like dun dun dun, right? It's scary music in the background, or you're clearly something bad is about to happen because there's like some scary violin stuff happening in the background or drum music. You know something bad's about to happen. So I put these two pictures because they're both from the same movie, just in two different parts. Because this picture doesn't help us very much. We don't know if how we're supposed to respond to this picture. We don't know in this picture if Vin Diesel's character is a good guy or a bad guy. I mean, there's things we could say he's not. He doesn't exactly look like an accountant right here, or your average math teacher, perhaps. There are some things we can count him out, but I wouldn't say 100% that he's scary or particularly friendly. But I mean, it's hard to make some kind of a judgment and really respond to how he is right here as far as an emotional response, other than he looks really cool because his eyes look really cool right here. And it's Vin Diesel. So that's really all we could say. There's not enough material for us to really get a good response. But this particular picture gives us a better way to respond to how we're supposed to feel about him at this juncture in the movie, because he's chained up. He's all chained up. He has this look on his face like he might eat you, and he's locked up from head to toe. He has chains on his hands and arms and locked down this way. He's chained at the neck inside. He has all these weird things on him. It says lockout protocol, no early release. So you get this idea that he's a bad guy. And at the beginning of the movie, he kind of is. He's kind of the good guy, bad guy, good guy. It's very confusing. So we get a better sense of how we're supposed to respond to him. Like, ooh, he's scary. Here, he's cool, but is he supposed to be scary? I don't know. Yes, scary. But we're not watching a movie. We're reading stories that have nothing but words marching across them. So we don't get any of this. We don't get all these little details, do we? You just get words. So words bear the burden of controlling the ways which the readers respond. So the writer really, really, really has to do their job in making sure they leave in the right amount of details at the right time to make us feel the right way. So they have to do that through their use of diction at the right time. So timing is very important here. So one of the ways that they start working on their tone may start off right off the bat with creating this overall effect of the whole story, and that is, what kind of diction is the entire story going to use, and what kind of diction are the individual characters going to be talking in. So overall, the whole story going to be written in formal, neutral, or informal, or sometimes just called high, middle, or low diction? So this is talking about, are they going to be talking super fancy? Like, are they going to polysyllabic? Just means, poly means multiple, syllabic is syllable. So multiple syllables. In other words, long words, right? With a whole bunch of syllables in it, like a 4 or 5 syllable word. So the word polysyllabic itself is actually polysyllabic. It has multiple syllables in it. Using correct syntax order, as in proper sentence syntax, excellent grammar, absence of contractions, so they're not going to say don't, can't, won't, right? So if somebody were to say, who is it? They would say, it is I. I mean, I don't normally go around saying it is I when somebody says, who is it? But I mean, maybe you do. Maybe we should say that all week. It is I. Probably not. So who talks like that? I don't know. This is a very formal diction, very high-end journal writing, might use this type of writing. And some of the older reading that you may have done, more like Edgar Allan Poe is probably more up in this higher end diction. He really liked his formal diction. We're more likely to use formal diction. But it may not even be that the whole story is written in a specific diction. It may be like a character in the story might talk this way. So it may tell you something about the character, right? Oh, okay, this character is, either very educated or this character is being kind of pompous, right? They think they're better than other people or something. Middle or neutral diction is where you're more likely to see whole entire stories written. Standard vocabulary, more like speaking vocabulary, like we talk, like I'm talking. Shuns longer words, not going to go around using super long vocabulary dictionary words. Uses some contractions. Instead of saying it is I would say it's me. This is more likely where you're to see most modern fiction stories, and probably where a lot of average characters are going to be speaking in this neutral or middle diction. Informal or low diction, you're very unlikely to find an entire fiction story written in this this level of diction. It would be very unlikely. What you are likely to see is characters speaking in this level of diction because they're trying to capture how a specific character speaks, and that would be something colloquial or substandard or slang. It doesn't have to be like yo or something. It is I, it's me, yo. It could be whatever the specific standard or slang is, or however we would speak at home for whatever area you were in. Like if you were like in the regular town of London, and you were just like out on the stoops of London talking to your friends, however they would talk. I'm not from London, so I have no idea, but whatever they would say there. Or from Canada, I don't know. Or however my friends up in Boston talk, which is funny. Saying things like wicked all the time, which cracks me up a lot. So informal or low diction would be just our own substandard or slang language that we use all the time when we're not at work or at school. So that would be more likely how the characters would talk. So ask yourself, why change the language up when the characters are talking? What does it tell us about the characters? What kind of clues does it give us about where they may be from, what their level of education is, or are they around a different group of friends? Because sometimes your diction may change depending on if you're around your friends, if you're around your family, etc. All right. A different way to create a unique effect in diction to alter tone is this whole kind of continuum called general to specific language. And I mean, it kind of is what it says. It's using general language all the way to being very specific. Now, initially you may say, well, why do you have to even explain that to us? It sounds like what it says. Because it is what it says. The only reason I'm going to explain it to you, or we're even looking at it, is because it's not by accident. If you have an actual really good writer, like we're reading literature in this class, so you're not reading any stories by Joe Schmuckatelli that just like posted something on Amazon or something last week. These are world-renowned writers, right? I mean, we're talking about Hemingway and Shakespeare right? So these are not by accident. Everything they do is by design. Really well thought out design. So they're using this, and if any of you are writers or budding writers or want to be a writer, here's some tools for you. This should never be an accident. You should never be general in your language by accident, or even specific in your language by accident. This should all be extremely well designed. So if you're going to be vague, you should be being vague for a reason, and you should be specific for a reason. It all needs to be used in spots for a very specific reason. So if you notice that you're reading along in your story and you're like, God, this writer is being so vague, you have two options. Either the writer sucks, or if it's a well-known writer and they have all this body of work behind them, like everybody we're reading in this class, they're being vague for a reason. And it's usually because they are trying to get you to bring in your own thinking, your own critical thinking. They want you to bring your own experiences in to the mix and start making you think about this in a different way. If they're being specific, it's because they do not at all want you to bring in and fill in the blanks. There's a specific reason in this specific part of the story that they are unwilling to relinquish any space, to give you space to bring in your own picture in your head. They want to give you a very specific picture. So they constantly in a story work along and slide along continuously along this slide rule of general to specific language. So it's the difference. So I made an example at the bottom. In a story, if all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, what was that noise? And they're like, some animal is making noise. Well, if somebody said that to me, if I heard a noise and I'm like, what is it? And they said, some animal's making noise, that would freak me out. Because immediately, if I was home alone especially, and it was dark outside, I would think, there's a bear outside and it wants to eat my face. Because nobody told me what it was, and nobody said what kind of noise it was. I tend to be paranoid and think the worst. So maybe I don't spend enough time outside, and that's why. So, there is that. And you may have just been thinking in your head, it's probably just a squirrel, or maybe it's a mouse, or maybe some of you were thinking it was a snake. So, we all may have brought a different picture to here. Or maybe you didn't even think about it at all. You're like, it's a cricket. Who knows? If I would have left you alone and stopped talking for a second, maybe you could have actually developed a picture in your mind. So in my mind, as soon as I heard some animal is making noise, I always think bears. And it's because we lived in Montana for 3 years on recruiting duty, and there were bears outside. And I don't mean like I'm thinking about there's a forest and there's bears in it. I mean like there was bears outside. I mean like they were outside, like in the trash, like knocking over the trash. There were bears outside in the trash. So I don't like bears. They eat your face. So yeah, I have what I feel is a very healthy fear of surviving bears. So that's where my mind goes. It goes straight to something that I'm scared of, and that would be a bear. And the noise it would be making is the noise I imagine a bear would make when it wants to eat your face. So that's me. That's me bringing my own thought process and my own fear into something so vague as some animal is making noise. Now, maybe if you're having a really happy day right now, or evening, whenever you're watching this, you're like, oh, there's some little bird outside singing a nice little song because you don't go to a dark place like I just did. And that's wonderful. And I'm sorry if I just made a really weird thing with the whole bear eating your face, but maybe you thought of something really nice. And that is exactly why an author would go vague here. They would do it on purpose. Super, super vague is because the author's trying to see what they could get you to conjure up in your own head. And it's exactly why in some of those horror movies or suspense books that you read, it's exactly why they will say something like, and then they heard a noise outside. That's just ridiculously vague. And of course your mind is going to think something terrible because you're reading a suspense novel, so it's supposed to be something terrible. And then only find out it's a stupid bird or something. So that's why they would be general. But what if they didn't want you to go too dark? They don't want you to think, first of all, they don't want you to think it's a bird. And it's about to start out to be a Disney movie or something. But they also don't want you to go too Weiss dark and start thinking about bears eating your face. So the author decides to go one notch up on the continuum and say, well, I do want them to think about a dog, which is not just an animal. It's a specific animal. It's a dog. And I don't want them to think of some just random noise outside. I want them to think of a dog barking. So now we have something a little bit more specific. So instead of some animals making noise, they're like, there's some dog barking. Okay, so now we have a clearer picture, right? They are like, some dog is barking. So now we know that there's a dog barking. Well, if you love dogs, I love dogs, so maybe that's not that scary to me. That's certainly, to me, less scary than a bear making face-eating noises, okay? But what if you don't like dogs? What if you're scared of dogs? What if last week you got bit by a Doberman Pinscher? In my mind, I was just thinking of a mini Pinscher, and that's just funny, and not scary at all. But what if you got bit last week by a really big dog, and right now you're freaked out by dogs? So it could still bring in negative thoughts, because this still could be positive or negative. We don't know. So it's still vague, right? It's still pretty general. It's not most general, but it's still kind of general. We know it's a dog. We know it's barking. Barking could be good or bad. Barking could be funny. My dog barks sometimes and she's just playing. But barking could also be a warning sign. Barking could also be something bad. And we don't know what kind of dog. So we don't know what's happening. But what if the writer's like, okay, I don't want them to be worried at this point, and I want them to think of a very specific dog. So they decided to be really, really specific. The author doesn't want you to be able to wander too much and bring in your own picture. They decided to give you a specific picture because that's what they want to do at this point in the story. So instead, the author says, my Cocker Spaniel, Kaylee, is barking down the hall. So now there's a totally different vibe. Now you're talking about your own pet. The author inside the story is saying, so that's the character's own dog, Cocker Spaniel. So now you know it's not a rabid pit bull coming after you or something weird like that. I have nothing against pit bulls. I was just saying. My Cocker Spaniel, so some small Cocker Spaniel, Kaylee, so some little female, this is my dog's name, by the way. So my Cocker Spaniel, Kaylee, is barking down the hall. So it's your own pet inside your own house, little cute Cocker Spaniel with an attitude, Princess Kaylee, is just barking inside the house. That's a far, far, far cry from where we started, where I was worried about a bear eating my face, okay? So this is a continuum. So if you're reading a story and the author is giving you some very, very, very specific details, they're doing that for a really good reason. They are not leaving you any space for you to imagine outside of what they want you to see. So this gives you something very specific to visualize. But if they're being really vague like this, some animal is making noise, they're doing that on purpose too. If they're a good writer, this is them trying to leave you open to bring in all sorts of different possibilities in your head, for you to just be throwing at the wall of your own brain the possibilities that could be out there. And what could it be? Is it good? Is it bad? So if you see this, you have to ask yourself, why? Why would the author be this vague? Why is the author being this specific? And what does this mean at this part in the story? And this will make a lot of sense as you read some of the stories, because some of the stories are extremely, extremely specific, and some of them are so, so vague. You're just like, what is happening right now? Why? Why would they be vague? Why leave out all this information to leave you to wander around in it? Well, why indeed, right? Because they want you to find your own X marks the spot by kind of being a detective in there. So another one of the tricks that they'll use to try to get you to understand tone inside of the story and get to that tone inside of the story is abstract and concrete language, which goes really, really, really well with that whole general and specific continuum that we were just looking at, it goes right along with it really well. So let's talk about concrete and abstract. So concrete, I think the easiest way to remember concrete is concrete. So think of what concrete is, like cement, right? Something that is concrete is there. It is something, if there was like a piece of concrete cement in the middle of your living room in the big shape of a square that was like a foot or 2 feet tall, you would stumble into it. If you kicked it, it's going to hurt your foot. If I kicked it, it's going to hurt my foot too. If the whole class kicked it, it's going to hurt all of our feet. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how weak you are. It doesn't matter if you have big feet or little feet, if you're male or female, and it makes no difference. Kicking it is going to hurt, because concrete language describes words of immediate perception. So perception means how we perceive things in our senses, okay? How we describe things that we perceive immediately, how we describe how our senses take things in immediately. Our sense of touch, our sense of hearing, our sense of taste, right? Our sense of smell. So if you kick something that's immovable, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt all of us. I don't care how strong you are and how weak you are or how whatever. Maybe you won't scream and the next person will, but whether you scream or you don't scream, it still hurt you, right? Because bones are bones and it hurts. So whatever. So concrete is immediate perception. Just like if you put your fingers into the flame, it will burn you. If I put my fingers into the flame, it will burn me. It is hot. The flame is hot for all of us. Again, whatever your level of pain is, makes no difference. The flame is hot for us all. Again, whether you screamed or not is a totally irrelevant thing. The fact is, we will all perceive that the flame is hot. If we all go into snow, we will all perceive immediately that it is cold. It is cold for everybody. Now, whether you like the cold or not, like I like the cold, and a lot of people hate the cold, which people tell me that all the time since I live down here. Because I say, oh, we lived in Montana for a couple of years, and they're like, oh my God, why did you live there? And I'm like, I kind of liked it. I don't like driving in the snow. That really sucked, but I like the cold. You know, I don't like the heat. I don't do well when I go outside and it's warm. I kind of just get really sick. So I just go back in the house. So if it's cold enough to make the humidity in the air turn into ice, it is cold outside. I don't care if you like it or not. It is cold. So that is an immediate perception. So your liking it or not doesn't matter. It's still cold. When you touch it, it is cold. So concrete words mean you're describing immediate perception. If you touch something sharp, it's going to be sharp, right? So that's what concrete means. Concrete language is things like it was hot, it was cold, it was painful, it was spicy, whatever. Abstract, so concrete language is usually easier to deal with, than abstract language. Abstract language refers to broader and less palpable qualities, like things like happiness and romance and love and anger and joy and beauty. It's like, well, that's harder to say. I put the snowflake on here always to remind me that a snowflake can be both concrete and abstract at the same time. It's concrete because it's frozen, right? So if you put a bunch of snowflakes in your hand and make a snowball, it's cold, right? So in one way, a bunch of snowflakes together to make a snowball, it is concrete. It's going to be cold in your hand. It's going to be cold to you and to me. It's cold to all of us. I don't care who you are. It's frozen in water. It is cold. But it's also abstract, isn't it? Because this is a snowflake up close. And if I were to say that snowflakes are beautiful, well, that's abstract, right? That's an abstract quality that I'm assigning to a snowflake. Maybe you're looking at it and you're like, that snowflake is stupid. Or maybe you think it's ugly. Or maybe you think that it brings you joy. Or maybe it makes you feel inspired and it's artistic. Or maybe it doesn't make you feel anything at all. Or maybe it makes you feel cold on the inside, which is not concrete because it can't literally make you feel cold on the inside, but something about it makes you feel bereft of emotions. That's abstract thinking because it's not literal. So abstract thinking won't be the same for all of us. It's going to be something a little more subjective. Okay, concrete is more objective. We can all see and understand and feel that the snow is cold, or understand that the nail in our foot is painful, right? But we can't all maybe agree that the snowflake is beautiful or the snowflake is inspirational. So that's a different thing. So I hope that the snowflake at least helped us a little bit to understand concrete and abstract language, and that authors use it a lot in writing to try to get us to understand in their style. It has a lot to do with their style. Some authors use a lot of abstract language. Poe loves abstract language. Hemingway is a little more concrete. So, yeah, he has a little of both, but he uses a lot of concrete also. All right, we're getting there. Denotation, connotation. Easiest and hardest thing in here. Denotation and connotation. We use this all the time. You actually do this all the time, even if you don't realize you do it. You're constantly choosing your words because of connotation. Even if you don't realize you do this, you're already making these decisions on a daily basis. So we're just going to put vocabulary to something that you do all the time. Denotation is just what a word really means at the core. Connotation is when you choose a specific word because it has a slightly different extra shade of meaning to it than another word that's very similar. So let me give you some examples so that you know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about words that suggest that people are smart. Okay, so if you're going to talk about people that are intelligent, or that are intelligent, or even have above average intelligence, okay, that's the denotation. What the word means refers to what the word means. So let's say what the word means is intelligent. Okay, there's a whole bunch of ways to say that somebody is intelligent. First of all, you could just say that they're intelligent, right? But we could say words like intelligent. We could say smart. We could say brainy. We could say sharp. We could say witty. We could say brain. I said brainy. We could say brainy. We could say nerdy. We could say geeky. We could say dorky. Stuff like that, right? But connotation means that even though those words all really refer to the same thing, they all really mean somebody that's intelligent, you're suggesting that they're intelligent. Okay? They all mean the same thing. So why do we have all these stupid words? Why are there so many? Why didn't we just have one word? Well, that's because they all have a slightly different little teeny tiny piece of suggestion where we might use them in a different way and in a different situation. Some of them are more formal than others, like intelligent is pretty formal. And some of them are more informal, like sharp, saying that somebody's sharp. Oh, she's sharp, he's sharp. That's pretty informal, okay? And some of them have a more positive connotation, and some of them have a negative connotation. I would say intelligent, sharp, and sharp are very positive, you know? Bright, saying someone's bright, that's very positive, but also informal. Then we start getting to some of these weird kind of middle ground and start kind of going towards the negative. Brainy, I don't know. That could be kind of in the middle. Some people might like being called brainy. Some people might not like being called brainy. It depends on the kid. I mean, adults may not mind being called brainy, but some kids don't like that. Nerdy, I don't mind being called nerdy because I know I'm a nerd. That's fine with me. But I know that teenagers don't like being called nerdy. Kids certainly do not like being called nerdy. That would be very negative to some. Geeky used to be negative and now it's suddenly positive, interestingly enough. So geeky's okay now. Thank you, Geek Squad. I don't know. So geeky suddenly has changed positions and has gone from negative to positive. But I'll tell you a word that has not changed in its negativity, and that would be dork. Dorky is still negative. So just because you're a dork doesn't mean that you're smart, but sometimes the smart kids will be called dorks. So, it could be on the list. If you're sometimes the smart kids, if you're a kid and you're smart, you could be called a dork. So, dorky can be up there. So it just depends. We have lots and lots of words that could be up there depending on what age you are. Sometimes you get different words pinned on you if you're intelligent or above average intelligence. There's all these words that you can be called. And some of them are positive and some of them are negative. That's what connotation means. We have different connotations. It's kind of like the difference between calling somebody skinny versus thin versus athletic or petite or scrawny, right? I don't think petite's nice. Thin, I don't know. Some girls are okay with thin. Some girls are not. I'm talking about girls. Guys, I have no idea because they're just like their own thing. So girls, with my friends that are girls, they just have, there's this thing. Even skinny, I don't know sometimes. It depends on which one of my friends I'm talking to. Some of them like the word skinny, some of them not. So thin, even that one depends. Skinny, sometimes yes is okay, sometimes it's not. Petite is always good. Athletic is always good. It just depends on the person. What's not good is scrawny. Nobody wants to be called scrawny, but they all mean the same thing. They mean that the person is not overweight, right? They all mean the same thing. The person does not have any extra weight on them. That's what it means. They all have the same denotation, but they do not all have the same connotation. So if you're being nice, you would say they're at a healthy weight, they look nice, they're thin. Maybe you would say that, I don't know, depends on the friend. They're athletic, they have an athletic build, they're petite, whatever. But if you're being maybe kind of catty, you might be like, well, they're kind of scrawny, they're twiggy, right? Then you're being kind of negative, right? That's not nice. So, connotation. Different words have different pieces of connotation to them. So you kind of have to figure out which word you're going to choose, and even though it may mean the same thing as another word at the bottom of it, does it have a positive kind of vibe to it, or does it have a more negative kind of vibe to it? What kind of a connotation does it really have? And what really sucks and is difficult about the English language, I have to tell you, as much as I love English, teaching English and the language is so rich, but I'll tell you what, is this part changes, and that annoys me because it changes all the time. Connotations change. Well, just that whole thing with geek changed just in a short period of time. In a decade, it's changed. So words change. What's positive and negative could change in a very short period of time. What is a positive and a negative connotation? I don't mind when things all of a sudden take on a positive connotation. That could be very good. But it's really horrible when things that were positive then take on negative connotations. That's really, really unfortunate, but it is what it is, and it can ruin a word. And when a word gets ruined, hey, it gets ruined. And it's like, you can fight it all you want, and you could talk about its history, and you could talk about what it used to mean, but it doesn't matter anymore. The connotation sticks to it, and it is what it is until it comes back around again in another decade or 2 or 20. That word has now been kind of mushed up. So think about that when you're using certain words. Okay, we're almost at the end. We have 2 more things left, and then we're done, and we'll be done. Tone, irony, and style. Later on, we will come back to to irony in poetry. So we're only going to cover these in a kind of quick way here, and that's verbal irony. We're going to talk about these 3 types of verbal irony, which are very specific, because irony by itself is extremely complicated to talk about. So we're not going to get into it as a whole big thing. We're just going to talk about very specifically here verbal irony and these 3 common types of verbal irony. So overall, and this is like the worst, well, it's not the worst. I've seen a worse one. This is a terrible open definition of verbal irony. It says a contradictory statement in which one thing is said but another is meant. It's like, that's like, I don't know. I have seen a worse definition of irony, which was the act of being ironic. To me, that shouldn't even have been in the dictionary. It's like, yeah, Dictionary 101 should be that you cannot use the word to define a word. I mean, everybody knows that. So 3 common types of verbal irony is an understatement, overstatement, and double entendre. So I'm going to start with hyperbole, which is in the middle because we use this all the time. You just probably never called it hyperbole. Hyperbole is an overstatement. We do this a lot. So things like, how was your day? I thought it would never end. Or, how was your online English class? My lectures are like 500 hours long. Slight overstatement, but not too far off. Hyperbole means you're overstating it because it's how you felt. And you're overstating it on purpose. So if the slide set is an hour long, you wouldn't say, oh, my slide set was 1.5 hours long. That's kind of the lamest hyperbole ever. You really want to overstate it. If it's a hyperbole, you want to say something like, oh my God, it was like freaking 5 hours long, or it was like 10 hours long, so that you're really, really, really clearly overstating it because you're doing it on purpose. You're obviously overstating it because you're making a point. That's why it's verbal irony. You're being hyperbolic. That's why it's called hyperbole. Overstating it obviously on purpose, because you're making the point that to you it felt 5 or 10 hours long. And to me, talking, I'm losing my voice, it feels 500 hours long to me too. So hyperbole is overstatement, okay? Unrealistically over the top. So with that in mind, let's talk about understatement. Understatement is actually very difficult for students sometimes because they'll actually usually just give me a hyperbole, which is really weird to me. Understatement is when you actually tell me what happened, but act like it was less than it was and it was no big deal. Okay? So for those of you who were here last year when Hurricane Matthew happened, many of you probably experienced people out of town calling you and asking you if you were getting a storm. I don't know oh my gosh. I can't even tell you how many people called me from out of state and said, "Are you guys getting a storm? Are you guys getting some rain?" I mean, clearly they saw on the news. That's why they called me in the first place, that a freaking hurricane was on top of us. And that's why they called me in the first place. I know they were just trying to be, I don't know what they were trying to be, but in the middle of all that mess, I was a little perturbed when people that hadn't talked to me in months or a year suddenly called me on my phone while I was trying to do all this stuff and deal with this mess, and called me up and asked me a question so ridiculous as, was I getting some rain or a storm? When clearly that's why they called. So my answer was, just a little bit. That's an understatement. And yeah, it sounds like you're being snarky. You're being a bit of a smartass. I mean, that's a little bit how understatement kind of works sometimes. And it's because that's what you're doing. You're definitely understating what is really happening. We really were getting rain. Obviously, we were getting a storm. It was a hurricane. Of course we were getting rain. For God's sakes. Oh my God. It's like they knew that. I don't even understand what the phone calls were. Sorry. That just annoyed me so badly. So it was an understatement. And the understatement was me being ironic because it was like, well, yeah. Yeah, we're getting a little rain. Just a little bit. Just a little bit of wind. Perhaps. So, yeah. Understatement is when you really are stating what's happening, but at a very, very, very understated low level. Okay? Hyperbole is when you're way overshooting it. So instead of saying something like, yes, we had a hurricane, you would be like, and the entire state blew off the map, and we're all floating out in the ocean. I'm almost all the way over to the Bahamas right now. That would be hyperbole. Understatement is, we got a few drops, a little wind, power blinked. Yeah, no, we had no power. So, understatement is going way below it. So somewhere imagine there's a line here of what really happened, and hyperbole is going way above it, and understatement is going way beneath it. Okay, the truth is in the middle. Double entendre. Double entendre is usually adultish in nature. It is something like, could often end with, that's what she said, is probably the easiest way I can think of to say it. It actually is even in kids stuff. Roger Rabbit, when was that? Was that like a few months back? Roger Rabbit was on not so too long ago. There's actually a scene in Roger Rabbit which is a Disney movie, where this lady is talking to the guy and she says, "Is that a rabbit in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" That's double entendre. Now, because it's very suggestive. even though she's asking him if he has a rabbit in his pocket or he's just happy to see me, she's suggesting something obviously very sexual. Now, to be fair, he did have a rabbit in his pocket. So I will put that out there. It was a Disney movie and there was a rabbit in his pocket. But still, there was this whole suggestion over top of it where she was saying one thing about, hey, is that a rabbit in your pocket? But, there was undertones of something else being meant there, that even though all the little kids were laughing because there was a cartoon rabbit in his pocket, all the adults were laughing because she meant something completely different at the time, because that's like an old line. But it would be kind of like saying something like, oh, nice tower, but, you're not really talking about the tower. That's that kind of thing. Double entendre. You're talking about one thing, but you're really talking about another. And that other thing that you're talking about is often sexual in nature. It doesn't have to be, but it often is. So there is that. Okay. I'm not going to say anything else about that. All right. Tone, humor, and style. Humor is obviously an aspect of tone, because you couldn't laugh if you didn't understand the tone. Sometimes we laugh when they don't mean for us to laugh because they failed in their tone, hence the B-flicks, horror movies. But obviously a primary ingredient to humor is something to laugh at. And sometimes, and I think this is, I don't know if adults still laugh at this sort of thing or if it's more of a kid thing, but disproportion and incongruity is often something that is what we laugh at, but really more it's stuff that violates what we normally expect. It's something that surprises us. We think something else is going to happen and we're like, whoa, and it'll make us laugh. It may not make us laugh like out loud laugh necessarily, but it'll entertain us. Maybe it's a better word to use is entertain us. I don't know. Maybe laughing is a weird way to say that. So later when we talk about, well, I guess, did we talk about that already? Maybe we did. No, we didn't. Later on, I don't even know if we'll get that far, but if we do get to talk about later, like dark comedies, which I don't know if we'll even get that far. Dark comedy goes in this description. Sometimes people try to get me to talk about dark comedies, and it's like it's so hard to explain those. But it's the reason that they're funny, quote unquote, not like ha ha funny, laugh out loud funny, just more like entertaining funny because they're so peculiar. This is why. It violates what we expected to happen. So it has that kind of incongruity in it. So it makes it interesting in some sort of dark, humorous way that's a little disturbing maybe. But otherwise I put the clown shoes up there because that's why people supposedly used to like clowns. I don't know if any of you like clowns. I don't think clowns are funny at all. I think there's something just inherently wrong about clowns. So I'm sorry for you clown lovers out there. It's just not my bag. But it's because of the disproportionality and the incongruity. The big gigantic clown feet and the hair with the rainbow colors and the big noses that sometimes light up or squeak, and the floppy shoes and hands and the weird outfits and the spinning bow ties and the flowers that squirt water that you don't expect. So all of those weird elements of a clown is supposedly what is entertaining about them and humorous about them and what causes laughter and supposedly what kids love about them. So I don't know. My kids were terrified by clowns when they were little. So I couldn't even tell you, in I don't know, people with their face completely covered in makeup like that is just freaks me out a little bit, but who knows? I don't know if it's still a thing that people think is funny, but we will find out. Right now, they're terrifying people. So better in horror movies to me, but that is why they were originally meant as entertainment and funny before we had TV and stuff. Is because of that disproportionality and that incongruity. Same with like jesters and stuff, which were actually kind of mean, but that disproportionality, that incongruity, was supposed to be what made them humorous and something to laugh at. All right, this is not a thing. This is just wrap up. Tone. This is the tone umbrella. What is under the tone umbrella for wrap up here? All this is part of diction, right? It's not, diction isn't under the tone umbrella. This is all the tone umbrella. Concrete language, abstract language, denotation, connotation, irony, right? Humor, general to specific language, high, middle, low. So all of that falls under tone and how things that we look at inside of a story to understand tone, and also things we'll look at even in poetry to understand tone. So things to think about when you're reading the stories this week, right?